Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be going over a unique item, which is a very strange one, and it's going to require a lot of explanation, especially considering it's only one small component of a rather large puzzle. And, man, this is, I hate to say it, but this one's going to be a long one no matter what. So you might want to play this one on 2x speed. We're going to be talking about the Ring of the Writhing Moon. The Ring of the Writhing Moon is an interesting ring. It's kind of complicated. Let's go over the ring first, then we'll talk about all the other stuff that happens with the ring. So the Ring of the Writhing Moon has a passive of 37.5% lightning resistance and 37.5% poison res. Pretty standard among most rings, as they usually have 2 reses, and this one, of course, is 2 reses. We have critical strike chance, which is odd for a poison ring, unless you're going specifically into Noxious Resonance. So maybe a little hint, hint, nudge, nudge in the Noxious Resonance, particular point of view. So a 7 to 8% critical strike chance there. It also comes with movement speed, which means that you might want to pair it up with, say, the Brilliance passive, because it's going to give you a nice multiplier from the Brilliance passive. It does go up to 34.5% movement speed, which is pretty fast. Easily can get 200% movement speed on the Spiritborn, by the way. I'm not even sure if you can go over the cap, but you probably can, especially since you can go over the cap on the block chance, too. It also has a lucky hit to make the enemy vulnerable of up to 47.2%, which means that you can pretty much keep the monsters vulnerable with like 100% uptime if you're attacking particularly fast. The bonus is nice if you don't have a vulnerable. Not really that cool if you do have a vulnerable, because if you do have some kind of vulnerable involved in your build, then, well, you don't really need it. On top of that, it also has the Unrestrained Power passive, which is +3 or +4 with the greater. And Unrestrained Power is a really easy one to get you multipliers. It's a 4% multiplier per point, up to, as you can see right now, I got 12 with 3, but it also goes up to 16 with 4. So you can get the original base 3, and then you can get 4 more from this. You can also potentially greater masterwork that Unrestrained Power, which I think is probably the best thing for you to greater masterwork on this ring, because that could potentially get you up to probably around 8, just like I have on this Supremacy. So you could probably be looking around 8 Unrestrained Power, which is a really nice bonus for just simply being unstoppable or unhindered, which my character is permanently unstoppable right now, which is kind of funny. Now, the special effect on this ring is a Pestilent Swarm spawns from you every 10 seconds, which is actually kind of crap, to be perfectly honest, and they need to work on that, because every 10 seconds is a really long time. And it's basically just useless. And to give you an idea of how useless that is, let's just go ahead and count it out, shall we? And we will actually check and see how long it takes, like in terms of like dishing out damage with this particular aspect. So you can see it's only one Pestilent Swarm. The Pestilent Swarm doesn't even last that long. It's actually quite pathetic. So 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, 5 1,000, 6 1,000, 7 1,000, 8 1,000, 9 1,000, 10 1,000. And I was a little bit fast, but there you go. You can see it takes a rather long time for that one Pestilent Swarm to spawn, and it's actually pretty pathetic in terms of like what you're getting from that Pestilent Swarm. In fact, the Pestilent Swarm that's coming from this is only once every 10 seconds, and it's not even a particularly very strong Pestilent Swarm by comparison to some of the others. I really think that they should increase that or change it to something else or something, because the Pestilent Swarm that comes from this is just bad. Especially when you consider a lot of the other ways that you can get Pestilent Swarms. This one just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Thankfully, that's not the only effect that's on this particular item. It also comes with a secondary effect, which is your Pestilent Swarms now orbit around you and generate 1 vigor per hit. Now, this is the part that actually makes it somewhat decent, because if you're utilizing the spinny, you can make it spin around you instead of spinning around whatever it is. Now, the flavor text on this says, within this corpse-bound carapace we writhe, chaotic winds converge to churn your bones, our beat and breath a ceaseless war to break the wretched cyclone black beyond the bounds Malazan's dream. So, to talk about how you can get the most out of this particular item, we have to talk about the other aspects. how Pestilent Swarms works. And this is where we're going to get deep into like more than probably you bargained for with this video. So hang with me, and we're going to start talking about all the various ways you can take advantage of Pestilent Swarms and this ring.
Mr. Goody Two Shoes, Mr. Goody Two Shoes. Ginger Evil Mentor here. Why bother farming when you can go to MMOEXP.com and simply purchase your items in gold? GGM would have you farm the items. What a pathetic being. Use code GEM Ginger Evil Mentor for 6% off your entire purchase. And don't tell Ginger Gaming Mentor that I was here.
Okay, so there are 4 different aspects, so if you include the ring, that can spawn Pestilent Swarms. And on top of this, we also have a rune combination of the Tal rune and whatever other rune you want to utilize for this particular Dewjank. This is the Tal rune, which has a Pestilent Swarm once every second, so it has a cooldown of 1 second. And let's go ahead and pull this one real quick, because we're going to need this as a demonstration. And we're probably going to need something to spawn it too, but that's okay. We got some on our characters. So when you spawn a Pestilent Swarm without any of the modifiers, what you are going to end up with is you're going to end up with a situation where it just shoots out straight. So as you can see here, it just shoots out, and it just goes in a whatever direction it was when you were facing when the Pestilent Swarm spawned. It's not exactly a very effective Pestilent Swarm, and it doesn't really do very much damage either, because it just shoots off into nowhere land, and it just disappears, you know, around the corner, so to speak. So not exactly the bestest of abilities in terms of like how it affects, you know, your character's damage output. The Pestilent Swarms by themselves just don't really do very much damage. They don't scale very well. They also don't last very long, and so things get complicated. If you're utilizing the Ring of the Writhing Moon, however, then you're going to get a Pestilent Swarm that is actually traveling around you. So instead of one that is just simply disappearing into the distance, now when you use your cooldowns, you're going to get one that actually travels around you in a circle. So as you can see, I'm using the Yule rune right now, which is to use my cooldowns. And so every single time I use my cooldowns, I'm getting closer and closer to a Pestilent Swarm, which is how this particular, you know, rune works. Now, that's just one of many methods that you can use. So spawning the Pestilent Swarm using the Pugilistic Locust rune word is just one way. You can also potentially utilize the Writhing Moon, which gives you a free one once every 10 seconds, as we already covered is kind of garbage, but at least it's one free one. You can also potentially utilize the other aspect. So there is the Hoop of Pestilence, which gives you the Stinger spawns Pestilent Swarm at its location and deals 75% of Stinger's base damage per hit. Pestilent Swarms now last 100% longer, and they now spiral outwards. So this is kind of important, because if you want to use Pestilent Swarms, you really kind of have to use this one. Because if you don't use this one, the problem is that your Pestilent Swarms don't really last long enough to actually be useful. If you do use the 100% increased duration one, you'll notice that your Pestilent Swarm lasts a lot longer and stays up so that you can actually get more benefit from it. If you're utilizing the Writhing Moon aspect or ring included, now it spins around you. So instead of just spinning, you know, in general, like it currently does, like if you use just the Stinger aspect, you'll notice that it just spins, and it doesn't spin around you specifically. But if you utilize the Writhing Moon, now it's spinning around you specifically, and it follows you wherever you go. So combining these two together seems important. However, if you only have like 1 or 2 of them, that doesn't seem very effective, right? You would probably want more than 1 or 2. In which case, you probably also want to include this aspect, which is the Lucky Hit Centipede skills have up to a 35% chance to spawn Pestilent Swarm from the target, which deals, you know, a certain amount of damage. So now we're cooking with some bacon grease, right? Now we've got a decent number of Dewjanks. Let's go ahead and put the Pestilent Swarm in there real quick. We can add the Pestilent Swarm into this from the rune. So let's go ahead and pull these, and then we're going to take... and then we're going to put the Yule Tal in here. So now we have all 3 on, right? And there's a 4th one. It has to do with the Touch of Death Swarms. It's a little bit different. And there is one more way to spawn Pestilent Swarms, and we'll cover that in a minute. Now, the added benefit of the Centipede one, or rather the Infestation generic one, is that it turns your Pestilent Swarms into poisoning damage, which is another interesting way that you can potentially push things. Poison and poisoning are two separate damage types. Poison is direct damage, and poisoning is damage over time. So this one not only gives you a chance to spawn them with any Centipede skill, but it also gives you a chance to get, obviously the poisoning damage as well. So we're going to swap over to the Centipede passive right quick so we can turn Rushing Claw into a Centipede skill. And then I'm going to see how many of these I can potentially spawn. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start attacking. And you can see I'm just going to keep on smacking these up. And as you can see, I clearly have a large number of them on my bar at any given time at that point because I'm spawning them from multiple different, angles, right? I'm spawning them from, obviously, the Centipede skill itself. I'm spawning them from the Writhing Moon Ring. I'm spawning them from the Rune Word. And if I really wanted to try and get, like, the maximum ridiculous amount, I would probably also need Stinger, which is another way that you can potentially add in more. So you'd put Stinger on the bar, and you could potentially use that to try and get a larger amount. As you can see, I'm getting one from Stinger every single time I use it. I'm also potentially getting one from the Rune Word every single time I use that. And then I'm also potentially getting one from the random lucky hit bonus from that. So you can stack up a relatively large amount. Now there is a glyph, and this particular glyph is the Consumption glyph, which gives you 2% increased damage per active Pestilent Swarm and Touch of Death Swarm, which are two different types of swarms, which I believe stacks up to 15. If I throw this in the place of, let's see. I'm trying to see which one has intelligence on it, because it'll be easier to swap that way. Not that one. I believe this one is intelligence, so let's swap consumption with canny. Now, when you get your Pestilent Swarms, what you're going to notice is that your Pestilent Swarms stack up in number on your bar. So you notice how I currently have, 5, 6, it's right here. This is the buff right here. So as I stack up my Pestilent Swarms and I get more and more of them, I'm going to get that multiplier as high as I possibly can, and maintaining it is essentially how you can get a large amount of additional damage. The Pestilent Swarms themselves can be used in either one of two ways. You could utilize them to A, do damage themselves, or B, you could also utilize them to increase your damage via a multiplier. The problem with using them to increase your damage via multiplier is that you need too many aspects to actually take advantage of them. I feel like you're probably going to want to go full in no matter what, because there's just so many aspects that you can potentially use. Increasing the damage of the Pestilent Swarms is actually relatively easy because you get access to the Consumption glyph, which is going to give you a large additive bonus on the Pestilent Swarms themselves, as well as a multiplier, which also happens to apply to the Pestilent Swarms. On top of this, you can also get the actual aspects, tempering aspects, or affixes rather, that give you a large bonus damage to your Pestilent Swarms as well. So if we take a look in the tempering window and you look in the offensive, you'll find a 150% bonus damage to Pestilent Swarms, which is pretty nice. And that's going to stack, of course, with the glyph, and it's also going to stack with other bonuses that you could potentially add. Now, what other bonuses can you potentially add? Well, you can potentially add the Unyielding to this. Now, one thing that we have found is that the Unyielding bonus actually does apply to the Pestilent Swarms. And you can see this by applying Unyielding. So let's go ahead and put Unyielding on for the moment. And I'm going to use a Gorilla skill to activate the Unyielding. Let's just go ahead and put this right here because it's easier that way. And you can see that my current damage on the Pestilent Swarm for this particular ability is 975 because it's on a two-hander. If I utilize this the right way and I activate my Unyielding, you can see that I am currently at 3,255 on my Pestilent Swarms instead, which becomes the base damage for the ability, which is multiplied by everything else. So you can see how Unyielding affects the Pestilent Swarms as well, and is probably most definitely something that you're going to want to include in the mix. Now, I also talked about another way to potentially get Pestilent Swarms more than what we have talked about previously. So, Writhing Moon, Infestation, and Pestilence are just 3 of the ways that you can potentially get Pestilent Swarms. And of course, the rune word itself, which is the pugilistic rune word, pugilistic locusts, or depending on how you set it up, you can set it up a myriad of different ways. So it really depends on what you're doing. I would probably, if I was doing the Stinger build, I would probably set it up for Tem, I think. Tem would be a better option, or Tam, yeah, Tam, because you get 25 offering per use of a non-channeled core skill, and you can just spam Stinger, and you can pretty much maintain like 15 of them nonstop. So I don't see that one as being too much of an issue. The other way that you can potentially get Pestilent Swarms, which is rather interesting and may not be something that you've ever really noticed, is the ultimate, the Devourer. So the Devourer has the ability to grant Pestilent Swarms and also functions as Shattered Vow does. So if you've ever used Shattered Vow, you know that Shattered Vow will execute a monster if the damage over time that is affecting their life exceeds their life pool. If you read Exalted Devourer, it specifically says that while the Devourer is active, if a non-boss enemy's remaining life becomes poisoned, they die instantly and unleash a Pestilent Swarm that deals 16,615 damage per hit to enemies it passes through. This means that if you're utilizing the Exalted Devourer and you kill any monster with damage over time, you will immediately spawn a Pestilent Swarm from the Devourer, which will function very similarly to any of the other Pestilent Swarms that you're using, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about it, because now you're getting even more Pestilent Swarms whenever anything dies, and they're just going to be shooting all over the place, which is pretty cool. You can also scale these, so same way I did with the Unyielding. If you're utilizing the Unyielding, you can scale the damage of these Pestilent Swarms from the Devourer by utilizing the Unyielding. So as you can see, they're currently at 75,963 damage with the Devourer. So that's actually pretty cool, right? And there's a lot of various ways that you can do this. So let me bring up a little notepad that I've prepared in advance, and let's talk about this for a second. So Writhing Moon gives you the orbit, so it orbits around you. Infestation gives you a lucky hit proc, which is a generic lucky hit proc for anything that is a centipede skill, and also turns them into poisoning damage. This is important because if you want to utilize the Devourer, you need poisoning damage to make it work. Pestilence, which is the aspect that increases the duration, is very important, because if you don't increase the duration, they don't last very long. And if they don't last very long, then they're not doing very much damage, and they're not very useful. It also increases the number of procs through Stinger. So if you're using Stinger specifically, it gives you a lot more Pestilent Swarm procs. The Devourer spawns them on execution via poisoning damage. And it executes anything, by the way, except for bosses. If you read it, it specifically says that anything other than bosses. So if a non-boss monster's enemy's life remaining becomes poisoned, they die. It's plain as day. So anytime any monster reaches the point where they hit poisoning damage greater than their life, they're immediately going to die and spawn you a Pestilent Swarm. So another very interesting way that you can potentially spawn them. The rune word, of course, also spawns 1 per second. Then you can scale their damage, obviously. Writhing the Stinger aspect increases the duration, which is a very large increase in damage. The changing from poison to poisoning actually increases the damage greatly because it allows you to take advantage of damage over time bonuses as well as poison bonuses. Via the consumption glyph, which gives you the additive bonus to the Pestilent Swarms and also gives you the multiplier of 30 times. Then you also have the poison damage additive bonuses, the poisoning damage additive bonuses, and the damage over time generic bonuses as well, which can all help scale the damage of these abilities and a lot. And just for reference, the poison damage additive bonus also applies to poisoning, and this can be easily confirmed by opening up your status panel and taking a look at the panel. So on the panel, you will find it simply says damage with poison right here, and it says increases your poison damage dealt, and this also includes both direct poison damage and poisoning damage over time, whereas your poisoning damage bonuses do not include poison damage. It's only poisoning damage. And it says it right there. It says, but not direct poison damage. So when you're stacking poison damage, you are stacking poisoning. But when you're stacking poisoning damage, you are not stacking poison damage. Just a little bit of a thing to think about there in terms of like how you build your damage output. On top of this, you can also grab the keeping them with you. So keeping them with you is also kind of important for damage if you have something that's like teleporting you or dashing you around the battlefield, like Ravager dashes you around the battlefield, or utilizing things like the rushing claw to dash you around the battlefield, or soar. It doesn't matter what you're using. If you're using something that's going to move you around constantly, this is definitely going to be something that's going to help you get that damage output while you're moving around. Unyielding hits. Unyielding hits scales the damage tremendously and is very, very effective in terms of increasing the overall damage of the Pestilent Swarms themselves, which is very nice. And then we also have, of course, Noxious Resonance. And I didn't really include Noxious Resonance on here, but it's definitely something that can be included in the list. Because, of course, the more poison damage that you're doing, the more poisoning damage that you're doing, the more likely it is that your Noxious Resonance is going to pull that poison damage, and it's going to cause a nice explosion, which is going to do a very large amount of damage. So Noxious Resonance is essentially feeding into how you're applying large amounts of poisoning damage to the target. Now, if you do use Noxious Resonance with the Pestilent Swarms, you're going to want to, at the very least, utilize the Infestation, because Infestation is going to give you the poisoning damage. And since Noxious Resonance doesn't work without poisoning damage, you need to convert the Pestilent Swarms into poisoning damage to make this work. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're taking the Infestation to convert it into poisoning. You're using the Pestilence to increase the duration to 100%. You're using the Writhing Moon to increase the likelihood that they're going to be around you and next to you, so that they're hitting the targets that you're fighting, obviously. And then you can also potentially use the Devourer to get some more free ones if you want to in the mix. Now, you don't necessarily need all of them, but you do kind of need at least the duration and the poisoning. Those are like the two that are kind of mandatory. This one's not really mandatory. I found that when I was playing around with this, I could very easily spawn like 15 or 16 in a particular location, utilizing just these two, and then not really worry about this one. But if you do utilize this one, they do come with you, and so that's like a whole aspect to it as well, which is kind of fun. Where can you get yourself a Writhing Moon? Let's take a look at that really quickly. So if you go to Diablo4.life, there is a tools, target farming uniques, and you can click on Spiritborn, and you can go to the Writhing Moon ring, and you can see it drops from Echo of Varshan. So very easy to farm that one. You should be able to get yourself a pretty decent one relatively easily. What are you looking at for this one? You're probably looking at Unrestrained Power as your main focus, movement speed if you're doing the Eagle addition. So if you want like the Eagle multiplier added on, that's a good option. And then potentially you could do the vulnerable. The critical strike chance isn't like super important. And to go even further, the damage variance on the Pestilent Swarm spawns from you every 10 seconds isn't really important either. In fact, I would probably just see if you could shop for like a 4 greater affix one and not even worry about the Pestilent Swarm spawns from you bonus, because it's kind of useless. One every 10 seconds is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. You're talking about like the difference between like the rune word, which gives you 1 every second, to 1 every 10 seconds. That means that with the rune word, the Pestilent Swarms rune word, I can get 10 in the same time period that it takes this one to generate 1. So you're not really using this for the Pestilent Swarms. You're using it for the Pestilent Swarms orbit around you. That's what you're using it for. And then of course you're getting the vigor per hit, which is kind of nice, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. It really kind of depends on what you're trying to do with this build and what you're trying to achieve. I feel like if you're going with the Pestilent Swarms, you're going to build into the Pestilent Swarms, and that's really all there is to it. And it's going to take quite a bit of effort to make the build into what you're trying, like what exactly you're trying to achieve. This is a whole build. Like you either go full in or you don't go full in. I've tried to work it into a couple builds just to see if I could potentially make it work like as an additive multiplier, because of course it does give a multiplier, but it just doesn't work. Unfortunately, without the 100% bonus, it just doesn't really do very well. And then, of course, then you're looking at like, okay, well, I need to make it poisoning damage, so it actually amplifies with Noxious Resonance. And then before you know it, you're like 3 aspects deep, and it's taking up like every single aspect on your bar on a character that just doesn't have enough aspects on a regular basis, which is unfortunate. I do eventually want to like try and create a full Pestilent Swarm build, and I have a better idea on how to achieve it at this point, but we're gonna have to like save that for another day because I'm not doing that today. But it should be an interesting foray at the very least. I think honestly, if they just took this down by like one aspect, it would definitely be a lot more achievable. Like maybe if they just took the Stinger one and just like combined it into the Ring of the Writhing Moon, that would be a hell of a lot better. It doesn't really matter which one they do. I think honestly the Infestation one would probably be better on the Writhing Moon, and then the Stinger one could remain as it is. Or maybe they could switch it up just a little bit, but it as it is right now, it's just too many aspects to achieve mediocre damage, which is unfortunate. And that's really all I got to say. I'm pretty sure that the Unrestrained Power could go to at least 8 ranks, just like the Wuxia Nakpa, though. So you could potentially get a rather large multiplier out of the Unrestrained Power, which isn't terrible. So, I mean, that's something. I think that's pretty much it. This video has already gone on long enough. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos. Hopefully, I've been thorough enough on the Pestilent Swarms. But if you do have any questions, feel free to ask. Be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, keep watching.